Department of Energy during the last couple of years put $100 billion into loan guarantees for the nuclear power industry, which is, of course, since the Fukushima disaster, it has shown everyone how very brittle and dangerous those systems are.
Well, it all comes down to money, unfortunately, and until we're still enamored by the whole dollar, we're not going to push ourselves into a Type 1 civilization. We'll just continue to stay at zero.
Yeah, and the civilizations that are visiting us are beyond Type 3. So, in other words, they're at a level where they've been moving around the cosmos faster than the speed of light, going through what are called trans-dimensional physics. And this is another whole area of discussion. But it has nothing to do with wormholes. It has to do with you can take anything and create a high voltage signal around it, and that object will appear to disappear in front of you, and it will have blipped into another dimension, and then it can relocate on another point in linear space-time without going linearly. It goes non-linearly. So this is the kind of physics that our folks on my team have worked on. And obviously, any of these sort of breakthroughs in science can be weaponized, and therefore the question becomes, how are we going to move on unless it's a chicken egg? We've got to bring out the first level of these energy generation systems so that we eliminate the poverty and the inequality and injustice in the world, which is the root of conflict. Then we have to figure out how to live together peacefully. So the really advanced, amazing technologies that have been discovered through the study of extraterrestrial vehicles and the ones that we have unfortunately shut down and gotten access to, those technologies are quite amazing, and I understand them. The problem becomes you can't release those to a world that's been 100 years delayed in its social and spiritual evolution because of this other problem. So the aberration of greed and centralized control. So it's a massive undertaking, and most folks, I have to say, some of the policymakers and people I've met with in Washington who understand some of what's going on, they just say, well, this is too big of an issue. We can't even decide on the marginal tax rates, never mind something like this. And so I believe that actually it isn't going to be politicians, it isn't going to be corporations, it's going to be a group like ours that gets together and gets enough people behind it. And we do this in plain sight. I mean, one of the big mistakes that inventors and scientists have made is that they try to do this secretively. Well, if you do it secretively, you're playing to the power of the folks who have mastered secrecy. What you need to do is do it in a very disclosing way, very open way. And I think that's what we have to do, not only with all the information we have on the UFO issue and ETs, but also on these technologies. I think the development of them needs to not be a Silicon Valley secret project. It needs to be very open and very well known what we're doing with millions, if not billions of people as stakeholders seeing that. And this is what we want to do with this film series, is to bring that idea to people. And if it is successful enough, use that revenue to put the R&D, the research and development people together in a secure place, but basically virtually live stream what they're doing onto the internet so that if someone wants to come and threaten us, got you on the camera, and I tell people that, the only way I did the disclosure project was I get a death threat every week, and I'm not exaggerating, is that I basically do it in plain sight, and nothing I have is in one place. It's in multiple places. And so when you do something like this, you've got to understand that what they don't want to do is step onto the dance floor and have a 1 billion watt spotlight hit them. These sort of nefarious, secretive folks who are kind of like vampires that only come out at night. And I think that the way to deal with that isn't through some kind of conflict. It's through just speaking the truth and staying in that and doing it, however, very openly and fearlessly, because otherwise they're going to take you out. And I have seen so many brilliant inventors who've been shut down because they were one person doing it alone in their lab, secretively, and that is the most dangerous way to deal with this issue. You got to come together as a large number of people, which is what Disclosure Project did. I put dozens of these top secret guys together. No one really knew who they were until we popped it and brought it out. And I think that that's what we have to do now with science and technology and get the public behind it.
Well, I agree. Like I said, I think you have to become too big to be shut down.
Right.
If you hang out in your lab, you're going to be shut down. But if you have to change the equation from, instead of covering up the information, to you have to make it to the point where if you don't get involved, then somebody else is going to get involved. You know, whether it's the Chinese or the Russians or the Japanese or, you know, India or some other nation's going to get involved. So you sort of have to accept, well, the cat's out of the bag now. Do you want to control the cat or not?
Right, and what they really tried to do, you know, of course, a lot of conspiracy theorists didn't like the timing. You know, we did the National Press Club event with all these witnesses, and 4 months later, 9/11 happened. So what's interesting is that, it didn't change anything. In the last decade, there have been 14 countries that have opened up their archives on UFOs, from China and Great Britain to Denmark and Chile. And so what you find is that this is going apace. It's going to continue to happen. And in fact, you know, the majority of people in the world believe that the UFOs are real and someone's hiding something about it. The studies consistently say somewhere between 50 and 70%, depending on the study and how the question is asked. And so what we have to do, though, is connect the dots of what's behind the secrecy and what are they really hiding. You know, is it ET or is it something else? Is it how ET got here? Is it, you know, is it science? And what people have to understand is that, you know, just these UFOs that we have great video and photos of and that these pilots have tracked, they're not zipping around, you know, skies going 40, 50,000 miles per hour and making right-hand turns without decelerating using a jet engine or a rocket. I mean, and one of the things that I always remind the public of is that our electric grid is from the late 1800s. Your car engine is from Mercedes from, you know, whatever, 1888 or 1890 something. The jet engine was 1930s. And rockets was Werner von Braun in the 1940s for Adolf Hitler. So everything that's been developed in the way of energy and propulsion since the 40s is in a black box. And that's the problem.
Well, one of the, you know, when I wrote the Shell Game, I also got some death threats and some other types of threats. And one of the things that what I've learned is that the CIA uses something called COINTELPRO that they, rather than try to fight the system or the information coming out, they try to taint it so that you know, if you want to ruin a gallon of white paint, you know, stick a blob of red in there and then it turns everything pink. And so, you know, for instance, with the whole 9/11 issue was Bush involved, was Cheney involved, what was the truth behind 9/11? The 9/11 truthers were tainted by the CIA coming in and planning ridiculous stories along with the real stories, and that destroys an entire movement. And so you need to be careful about that because, I mean, that's already happened with extraterrestrials, with, you know, the anal probes and the...
Oh, sure. That's 90. You're right. You're right. It's about 90+% of all information on this subject is embedded information. I even know who it's coming from and how they're doing it. In fact, I've had meetings with folks at the CIA, and we talk about this. In fact, there's a PhD scientist. And so folks have no idea how much the information nexus on the UFO subject is mostly not the pure oil, but sort of this tainted information. And, you know, it's interesting. There's a guy who used to be the right hand to General Odom, who was head of the National Security Agency for years. And he says, yes, we have a term for that, DDT. So I said, what? You know, this is a chemical. He says, no. He says, DDT is that you set up, if someone's doing something, so you put something in there that becomes a distraction and a decoy, but it's filled with false information and it trashes the entire subject. And we call it DDT. And I said, yeah, well, you guys are very good at doing it. He says, oh, yes. And so, you know, and so most of what you see in the media and it comes out of Hollywood. And by the way, this is why we fiercely wanted to keep this film serious, independent. It's an indie film, and even our publicist, Jim Thompson, who used to represent a lot of big stars in Hollywood, he has a firm called Indie PR, and he's going to be working with us on the PR angle because we feel like we have to be very careful because if we're not, these folks who have embedded assets all over the place in Hollywood and in the media are going to start sticking nonsense in. And this has been my biggest problem, Steve. I'll tell you that, is that so many people have taken the material we have from, whether it's Disclosure Project or other materials, and they'll take it, repackage it, and commingle it with nonsense. And that is something that, I can't really stop except point out what the truth is. But I'm only one person, so it's a very daunting thing. And just like you mentioned with the 9/11 situation, a study came out a few years ago about the anti-war period during the Vietnam War, and they found out that in New York, if there were like 12 people who were at a meeting, 8 of them were on the Intelligence Committee payroll, either for the FBI, the New York Police Department, the Red Squad, this thing, the other thing, and had infiltrated that group. And this is now a matter of public record. Well, the same is true on the UFO subject, and the same is true on other things, is that they basically put people in there who match up well, and they become a vector or an entry point for disinformation, false information. And it is a very, very big problem when you're dealing with something that they really do want to keep secret, is that it's kind of hidden in plain sight, but trashed with all this false information, as you very wisely point out.
Well, I think, the suggestion is with the Sirius site, there needs to be a place there that sort of becomes, check, where people can send things in and check to see the validity of something. My mind's racing and I can't think of it, but there's a site on the website that when you hear rumors about different things, about different types of crimes, about people can type in the information and check it, and it validates it or draws it up to rumors.
Right. Well, of course, one of the problems is that we've always been a volunteer and unfunded operation, which means that any system like that that's put up, people think that we have some vast, office building filled with people working who could do what you're suggesting, but you don't have that unless you have any funding, which we have none. So basically, I funded it, and there are a few people who funded it, but we really have no resources for that. We hope that could change. One of the things we hope the film will do is cause people to realize that this is a subject that needs to be pulled out of the sort of the orphan status and moved up to where it's supported properly, so that what you're suggesting could in fact be done and properly staffed, and that the energy project, I had someone say to me once, your budget is really very low to create a high energy physics laboratory. I said, yes, it is. It's only $6 to $10 million. I said, but that, if you don't have it, you say it's not a lot, but when you go to conventional funding sources or to the people who usually do this kind of research, they'll say, oh yeah, you need at least that or more for a 2-year period to do a study. But if you don't have it, how are you going to do it? And so what we have to do is create the means where that can be done, and what you're suggesting can be done, where there's a clearinghouse where somebody submits a photo or a bit of information, it can be analyzed. And I think more importantly, we need a way to pull more of these whistleblowers out of the shadows and into the light. In other words, we get stuff every week from people who have worked in these areas, but I don't have anyone to hand it off to. It's not like we have a team of investigative reporters who say, hey, run this to ground and do a background check. And this is what, my wife and I and a handful of volunteers have done over the last, 15 years. It isn't, people have the wrong, it's become a worldwide movement, but it doesn't have the resources that you would normally associate. I was just looking at the Sierra Club's budget, where, last year they pulled down $110 million. Well, what are they doing? What they need to do is take 10% of that and put that into a new energy lab